So we're going to watch some videos today. In case you're unaware, a lot of these videos are from the React suggestions on my Discord. So if you're not already a part of the Discord and you have some videos that would be really cool to watch, true crime or non-true crime, doesn't matter as long as it's interesting. You can put it in the React suggestions of my Discord, and then be a part of a community who is, I don't know, are you guys chill? I don't actually remember. I feel like we scare people. I don't know. Anyway, and if you're watching this on stream already and you happen to have to go later, you can always go to the YouTube and it'll be uploaded in a couple of days, whatever. So boom, video time. Boom. So we're going to watch another video by Glimpse. I haven't seen this person before, but I've mentioned it a few times. We've talked about like the dichotomy of killers and the differences between them and how like a serial killer is different than like a spree killer, and the motivation of like going postal, like how the name Going Postal even occurred. And it the title seems to suggest that this person's gonna go over the sort of reasonings and how this sort of stuff happens and how it started. So yeah, I'm gonna get a Red Bull. I need a zip. Yep. Okay.
You should probably let me take lead on this. A lot of people don't like cops.
Check out this
And
video.
everybody loves
If you have
postal workers.
If you have a video suggestion, in my Discord, we have a suggestions channel for reaction stuff. Please join the Discord. Please post it in there. Even if you've already posted it and think I haven't seen it, post it again. Who fucking cares? It's not that serious. I accidentally skipped a bunch. So yeah, please join my Discord, be a part of the community, and if you have cool videos that you want to be a part of the channel or react to it, even if you're just somebody who wants to watch some stuff, there's plenty of videos in there that you could watch on your own time, but it is cool that you guys want to watch it with me. So
You should probably let me take lead on this. A lot of people don't like cops, and everybody loves postal workers.
They do?
That's why the phrase most associated with bringing goodness into people's lives is going postal.
You're kidding, right? Going postal means that...
I know what it means. I just said what it means. That's what it means.
Okay, well, how's about we avoid human contact altogether and check out the box?
The phrase going postal, where did it come from? What does it even really mean? These days, it usually refers to snapping and getting so uncontrollably angry that it leads to extreme violence.
True.
It's a term that gets used quite casually, but it originated from a disturbing phenomenon in the 80s and 90s. There were over 20 incidents of American postal workers storming into their workplaces and opening fire on their bosses and colleagues, resulting in over 40 deaths. The Wikipedia page for postal killings is quite extensive. So what exactly was happening at the US Postal Service that pushed so many of their workers to their breaking point? Was there a reason why postal workers were more likely to explode into a murderous rage? After all, there are shitty jobs and bosses in all industries in all parts of the world. In today's deep dive, we're going into each case to examine who these perpetrators were and what their motives were, and see whether or not there was indeed something in the water at USPS causing their employees to go postal.
God, I wonder if
Starting in the early
Reagan had
1980s,
anything to do with it.
Curtis Collins, a new hire, used a high-powered rifle to kill his supervisor
Would not
and
shock
wound
me,
a security guard. 2 days earlier, he had slashed her tires
I think
after
he
getting
just got
reprimanded.
elected like in
Terry
80,
Smith stormed the
early
post
80s,
office
so
with a
maybe
shotgun,
not, maybe
shot
not.
2 employees outside and killed the postmaster. He had quit 3 months earlier after 25 years on the job. Postal worker James Howard Brooks walked into the postmaster's office, shot him dead, and wounded another supervisor. He'd had a long-running feud with management. Stephen Brownlee.
It's always Reagan's fault. You know, funny enough, a lot of things end up being Reagan's fault. Yeah. If you're not a fucking idiot who just like believes whatever the fuck people tell you. A lot of the economic problems are the result of Reagan's initial choice. A lot of the drug issues are, I already talked about this on a different video. How fucking Nancy Reagan was just so racist. She got Ronald Reagan to just create a program to stop drugs, but they basically asked the Secret Service to go give black communities crack and get them addicted to manufacture a war on drugs that didn't even exist, because they were so worried about like marijuana that they just gave black communities crack just to have a bigger excuse. It's, once again, I mean, hilariously, not surprisingly, might be their fault. And a lot of the big overarching issues of America end up being, Reagan being an essential puppet for some big money people. And if that isn't a parallel to what we currently deal with, I don't know what is.
Postal veteran opened fire in the mail sorting area without warning. He killed 2 co-workers and wounded a third. Joseph Medina pulled a rifle from a mail bag, aimed it at his supervisor, and shot a co-worker who tried to help. He had a history of suspensions and held his supervisor hostage for 2 hours before surrendering. It was an ordinary workday at the Edmond Post Office in Oklahoma. Mail carriers were sorting trays and prepping for their routes, until Patrick Sherrill walked in and opened fire in what would become the deadliest workplace shooting in America, and gave rise to an expression that would stick in our lexicon: going postal. Just after 7 a.m., 44-year-old part-time letter carrier Patrick Sherrill entered the Edmond Post Office wearing his work uniform, carrying a mail bag loaded with 3 semi-automatic pistols and ammunition. He was completely calm. Without saying a word, he shot and killed his supervisor, Richard Esser, and fellow carrier, Mike Rockney. He chased down fleeing employees out a side exit, shooting another man who later died in the parking lot. He chained and locked several doors, forcing the post office workers to scramble under desks, inside vaults, and in the broom closet. He moved through the building methodically, killing 3 people at one workstation, 5 at another. Most of the 73 employees inside managed to escape, jumping over the front counter or out
that was the
door
origin?
he failed to secure. 18 minutes after the shooting began, a SWAT team entered the post office. They found the shooter, Sherrill, dead, seated in a chair, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. In just 18 minutes, he had killed 14 co-workers, all from gunshots to the chest, and wounded 6 others. In the aftermath of the Edmond massacre, a massive federal investigation was launched into what drove Patrick Sherrill to commit the second worst mass murder in the nation's history at the time, resulting in a 7,000-page report stacked 3 feet high, and no clear answers. US postal inspectors interviewed over 400 people, from Sherrill's neighbors and co-workers to members of his bicycle club, ham radio club, and church singles group, and got many conflicting accounts about him. Some described him as shy and withdrawn, others said he had shown clear signs of violent tendencies. Investigators checked out conspiracy theories, searched his home and computer disks, but nothing definitive ever surfaced. Patrick Sherrill had worked at the Edmond Post Office for about a year and a half after several failed attempts at getting hired. His record wasn't clean. He'd been formally disciplined several times and often made threats of revenge. 2 days before the shooting, Sherrill had contacted the postal union, reportedly trying to seek a transfer, and the day just before the shooting, a supervisor had reprimanded him about his job performance. Co-workers said that the warning signs were there. One postal worker said he was surprised Sherrill wasn't fired after his 90-day probationary period, given how poorly he performed. According to that worker, a supervisor admitted it was tough to let Sherrill go because of his veteran status.
It's interesting. Like, it's very interesting because you hear what he's saying, where it's like a bunch of his friends at clubs and stuff were like, I wouldn't have expected that. And then all of his coworkers are like, yeah, not shocking. It's crazy how masks work, man. It's wild how we change behavior in the situations we're in, and how frustrated we can be, and how calm and collected we can be in a different one. And then you combine that with like the just deranged behavior of like somebody willing to do something like this, and it's just the contrast. Yeah, like the difference is crazy. I mean, and this is what's so fascinating about like serial killers, especially because they just do this like all the time, except they're so good they're so good at publicly masking their behavior that nobody sees it coming most of the time, because the incentive for them to do it is even greater in their mind than like what we get just by being people socially. You know what I mean? Like being socially accepted as a serial killer it means they continue, or they're allowed or able to continue to do the fucked up things they want to do, right? For us, it's just like, I mean, there's plenty of benefits to being socially like friendly, acceptable, whatever, right? It's two big human desires. The two main things is we want to be correct and we want to be accepted, right? So like people really strive to have those two things in their life where they're accepted and they're correct in their ways, right? But like, yeah, John Wayne Gacy was a big member of his community. Exactly. Ed Gein was not like a prolific member of his community, but he was friends with the police. Like he tried to be a police officer, but at the time the standards were too strict for his height and his weight, because he's a giant. Like he was like 6'7", couple 100 pounds, right? Like dude is huge, and back then they didn't accept people that weren't within a certain height and weight parameter. So he just wasn't eligible. But he would or not Ed Gein, Ed Kemper. I don't know why I said Ed Gein. My bad. Ed Kemper. Ed Gein's a different one. So yeah, but because he wasn't able to be a police officer, but all of them knew him, he would go to the bar that like they would hang out at. Like they would hang out. Like he would be friends with a bunch of them at the bar they go to, but at the same time he's sitting there killing college girls, and like they have no idea. In fact, he gets caught because he thinks he's caught, and he thinks that they know what he did, but he flees a couple of states and calls in and gives himself up, and they have no idea what the hell he's talking about because none of them suspected him at all. It's interesting. You get some level of like confession from him in that regard. Also, he's fascinating in the sense that he like was quoted to be like, I don't want to leave prison. It's like good for me. Also, I would 100% kill more people if I got let out. It's crazy. I don't know why I said Ed Gein as well. Ed Gein's also a serial killer, just so we, I don't know. I got my wires got crossed. Yeah. Ed Kemper's name was the co-ed killer. If people don't know his name but know his like moniker, that's what they called him, because college people at the time were referred to as co-eds. He would basically drive around and offer rides to girls from their classes, and then he would kill them. That's what they do. Problem with the glasses, yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to see the change and the precision. I mean, you even hear him talk about this where it's like he went into that post office apparently and just said nothing, just opened fire, totally calm. It's fascinating and terrifying and morbid how somebody can just like step into their workplace where they've spent a lot of time and a lot of social bonding with people and just start killing them. It's like the thought of it is chilling. But there are people that exist that do that and did that. It's that's the mystery and that's the fascination, is there's no, it's so hard to tell. It's so hard to figure that out because one, somebody who typically does something like this ends up getting killed during it or by themselves or by the police. Like they tend to, spree killers tend to go do their thing until they're stopped, right? They don't just like do a little bit and leave. That it happens, but it is more like they go until they're stopped, right? That's the whole, like, they go on a spree. That's where the name sort of comes from. So you don't typically get to extract a whole lot of information out of people who do this specific type of killing, because most of them don't end up surviving the situation themselves intentionally. But even with serial killing, the amount of narcissistic and manipulative behavior within serial killers, like, they don't typically say anything worth taking like stock in. They're very good at like setting up and saving face and looking for an advantage. Like, the whole goal is perpetuity. Like, they want to be alive, they want to keep being alive, and they want to kill more. Like, that's the fascination of serial killing, is how they live to kill. Their motivation, their dopamine, their release, their satisfaction is from doing these things to people. And they will say, do, act, behave in whatever way allows them to persist. So it's fascinating to just like, but this is to tie back into the original point, like, serial killers especially are so good at social masking. They're so good at masking socially. Because of that motivation. They're so motivated to continue what they get to do or what they want to do that they become experts socially, but not because they want to be good at it or they love the bonding experience of being a human with others or the social benefits. The benefits are the disguise they garner from appearing acceptable. It's something else. It's a completely different neurological process. That's what makes it so fascinating. It's a totally like different wavelength of thought and ideas and morality, obviously, but once again, it yeah, like a means to an end. Yeah, like it becomes an objective. It's their entirety of existence is a completely rewired and different idea, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly how that happens or why that happens or when it happens. If it's like a innate feeling they have upon existence, or if it's a developed over time problem that they get through some kind of trauma, because there are a lot. Typically with serial killing, you see a lot of people who experienced some sort of physical or mental trauma early on that has allowed it to sort of and then the lack of being helped with that sort of stuff has sort of like fried their brain to the point. But there's also been a few anomalies where like There are serial killers who have been caught, and there's nothing wrong with them, besides obvious, you know, rhetorically, obviously what they've been doing, but like no struggles at home, no physical injuries, no mental trauma, nothing, like nothing wrong with them that would indicate why they could go down that path. You know what I mean? They just did it. Like they just wanted to do it. It's fascinating. It's something else. And that's kind of why this is such an interesting subject for me. Like this, the cognitive behavior of criminals is what fascinates me the most, because it's a completely different person. The logic and the justifications, the thought processes and the behaviors, the motivations for them are completely different to like mine and many of you. Like our day to day, our motivation to act a certain way and to be kind or be nice or be effortful is like a totally different experience than what they're motivated by. And it's like it's so hard to even try to figure that out, because one, they're not exactly going to share, because the more information like investigators get about behaviors like that, the better off they are at finding them. So like, but at the same time, narcissistic people like to be narcissistic and speak. So it's like they do have a lot to say, but is what they're saying actually ingrained in any truth? It's hard to tell, because they're really good at just looking good. It's crazy. It's fascinating. I mean, like, once again, that's such a deep motivation for me to like learn about this, to have learned about all this. Was like, it's so, the psychological changes in that person is so, the contrast is so fascinating. And like, I wonder if there's in any way a way to ever find out or tell. Like, as far as we know, there's nothing chemically within the brain that is a predisposition to it or anything. They've tried to find these things, and there's nothing as far as I remember. So I don't know. Sorry, that was a huge tangent. Let's go on the video. Let's go back to the video.
Employee who claimed to be a close friend told investigators he was always saying that someday everybody would be sorry. He said that several times, but he said that for a year. Cheryl also reportedly once told a customer, "One of these days, I'm going to kill every one of them." He never married, had no close friends.
I mean, yeah,
and
that's
lived with his
kind of
mother until her death about 8 years before the shooting. People in his humble working class neighborhood found his behavior to be unsettling, and local kids called him Crazy Pat. He was often seen prowling around other people's yards at night, with one neighbor saying he had pointed a telescope into her living room. Another neighbor said he would ride a two-seater bike with no one in the second seat. Inside his house, investigators found BB guns, paper targets, and marksmanship medals.
Oof.
Cheryl enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1964, though he was never deployed. He qualified as an expert marksman with the M14 rifle and later with a pistol, the highest possible rating. He was honorably discharged in 1966. In 1984, he joined the Oklahoma Air National Guard, where he served as a handgun instructor. His service record there indicated nothing out of the ordinary. He competed on the marksmanship team and was authorized to access pistols and ammunition, two of which he later used in the Edmond shooting.
Well,
now anyone asks, you didn't get this here. You're not a postal worker, are you?
The string of postal killings continued into the late 80s. Postal clerk Dominic Lipoli shot and killed a female co-worker after she reported him for harassment. The meeting to address her complaint was scheduled for the day after the murder. Lipoli was a known problem employee with a prior gun conviction and had a history of threatening co-workers. He was drunk at the time and killed himself 2 hours later. Postal worker Warren Murphy shot and wounded 3 people, then held his girlfriend hostage for nearly 13 hours before surrendering. Joyce Davenport, a distribution clerk of 21 years, shot and killed her ex-boyfriend Tim McCoy, a fellow postal clerk. Davenport had no known mental health issues or criminal history. John Merlin Taylor shot his wife dead in their bed.
Go run that back.
Prime time, let's fucking go.
Joyce Davenport, a distribution clerk of 21 years, shot and killed her ex-boyfriend Tim McCoy, a fellow postal clerk. Davenport had no known mental health issues or criminal history. John
That's the fascination right there, man. How does somebody with no prior problems just bang, just so decisively do that? It's an enigma. It's like such a huge question.
Merlin Taylor shot his wife dead in their bed, then drove to his postal station job half a mile away, where he killed 2 co-workers, wounded a third, before shooting himself in the head. Taylor was a 27-year USPS veteran, just 3 years away from retirement, and was described as a model employee. Quiet, friendly, rarely complained, and was well liked by co-workers and customers. People on his route knew him by name. He seemed to have a happy marriage, but underneath his mellow exterior, something had shifted. According to his local union representative, Taylor had become increasingly paranoid. He believed postal inspectors and management were testing him by planting money for postage on his route and watching his every move. He was convinced his co-workers and wife were in on it, conspiring to get him fired. Investigators later found a suicide note in his home which read, "I'm hurting a lot for my age anyway, and only have pain to look forward to. I'm really ready to go, and these assholes have given me a reason. I'm not crazy, just old-fashioned." In the early hours of October 10, 1991, 35-year-old former postal worker Joseph Harris broke into the home of his ex-supervisor, Carol Ott, in Wayne, New Jersey. He shot Carol's fiancée as he slept in a chair, then killed Carol in her bedroom with a samurai sword. He then went to his former workplace, the Ridgewood Post Office about 10 miles away, waited for 2 mail handlers to arrive for their shift, forced them into a room, and shot them both dead. Joseph Harris had worked at USPS for about 8 years as a clerk. During that time, he had racked up 5 warning letters and 2 suspensions for failing to follow instructions, refusing orders, and using vulgar language. He repeatedly clashed with his supervisor, Carol Ott, who eventually pushed for his removal. He was officially fired in May 1990 after refusing a fitness for duty exam. Carol had accused him of harassment, though she declined to file formal criminal charges. Co-workers described Harris as quiet, tense, difficult, and didn't take orders well and didn't respond to authority. His anger over his firing brewed for 18 months, and he began stalking Carol sometime in 1991, following her from work to her home and hanging around in her neighborhood. Harris was born in prison and had lifelong psychiatric issues. He served in the Navy from 1974 to 1977, where he was disciplined multiple times for disobedience and disrespect. His record described him as distrustful, defiant, and hostile towards authority. After the killings, police found a 2-page handwritten letter in Harris's home in which he blamed the Postal Service, saying he'd been treated unfairly. His letter also referred to the 1986 Edmond shooting, making it clear that this was a premeditated act of revenge. Police were also able to connect Harris to the 1988 murder of an investment broker named Roy Edwards. In 1984, Harris had invested $10,000 with the broker, but when the money was lost, he broke into the Edwards home dressed in a ninja outfit, assaulted Edwards' wife and daughters, then shot Edwards dead. Since hundreds of investors lost money with Edwards, police had not considered Harris to be a suspect at the time. Harris eventually received 2 death sentences.
Oh my God, look! It's disgruntled postal workers!
Oh my God, Naked Gun.
At 8:48 a.m., 31-year-old Thomas McIlvaine, a fired letter carrier, walked through the back dock of the Royal Oak Post Office with a sawed-off .22 caliber rifle hidden under his jacket. Over the next 6 minutes, he killed 4 postal employees, wounded 5 others, and then turned the gun on himself. Some employees were able to escape by hiding and jumping out windows. McIlvaine notably avoided shooting customers. He fired around 100 shots in total. McIlvaine had been fired in July the year before after repeated conflicts with management. His record included verbal abuse, a 7-day suspension for swearing, and a fitness for duty exam that diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder, a history of cocaine abuse, and traumatic early life experiences. After his firing, McIlvaine repeatedly called in death threats to the post office, and as a result, his concealed weapons permit was revoked.
Sneak on his phone. I'm actually doing research. Sorry for the lack of commentary. If you're not aware, a couple of days ago, some firefighters got shot at in Idaho. Well, at the time of reporting, people got shot in Idaho during a wildfire, right? And it was reported that it was potentially firefighters who got shot. Officially, 2 died and 1 got injured. It turns out, I'm not going to say the person's name because they don't deserve the recognition. That's part of the problem, is the glorification of the people that do this shit. Yeah, it wasn't a wildfire. This person deliberately lit it in order to draw out firefighters in order to shoot them, which was something I had mentioned as a possible motivation for him to do. In this article, his grandfather is quoted saying he wanted to be a fireman. He was doing tree work and he wanted to be a fireman in the forest. As far as I know, he was actively pursuing it. So I had mentioned at a previous crime time, I think, or just randomly in a during a stream previously, maybe the day it was happening, where it's like there's motivation to that. There's motivation to the specific victims. Why does he have issues with the firefighters? The same reason people do this. It's entirely possible that he was trying to be a firefighter and they basically told him to fuck off. And that's, unfortunately, can be enough for somebody to go after that. Like, you'll see this in like serial killers too, where like there are a lot where the hatred typically, like a male serial killer's hatred for women come from their mother, right? Like it's a thing that happens, not every time, but it can come from having like an abusive mother in the home, mentally, physically, whatever, right? And when you go down the list of their victims, there's a lot of parallels between how their victims look and how their mom looks. Back to Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper killed a bunch of college women until he eventually killed his mom, because he actually hated his mom the most. It's an interesting, yeah, like they become like a pseudo real, like a person to take it out on without actually taking it out on the person they want to take it out on. Yeah. And that's not just like parent to child. It comes to this sort of stuff too. With the example, this is why I looked this up, because I was curious if this guy in a way went postal, and based off of that sort of thing, there's no sort of manifesto or suicide note that's been found to my knowledge yet, but based off of that, the grandparents quote, it might be, it might be a similar situation where it's like, you know, if that's what he really wanted, some people really don't like rejection. It's enough for some people. It's enough of a motivator. And that's where my questions were when it happened, because I was like, if it was just firefighters that were injured and there were still hikers trying to leave the scene, etc., if he's just shooting at people, why aren't other people shot? And this is exactly why, because clearly his frustrations were with the firefighters for something they did to him. I don't think that's been made clear. I'm sure there's like rumors. I didn't see anything concrete about like the actual trigger for him to have done that, but you see the motivation within the victims. That's what's interesting, is the victims themselves shed light on the behavior or the motivation. So yeah, I was just looking that up to see if there was any confirmation behind that sort of thing. And there is, apparently. I not 100%, but it's interesting. So I remember talking about it at some point, and I wanted to bring it back up because it is like low key, it connects with this video in that regard, where it's like these, you know, job rejection, promotion rejection, horrendous treatment by your superior, etc. This stuff is a universal experience, but also some people don't want to handle it. Understandably, nobody should deal with it, but some people don't want to tolerate it so much that they do things like this. Fascinating. I have to piss, so we're going to take a little pee-pee break before we continue on, if that's all right. Okay. Everybody fart while I'm gone, all right? What the fuck is that? Why is the pink Pikmin flopping around? The hell's that about? That's an emote? When did this happen? Freak pink? When did we get that as an emote? Whatever, dude.
Hello, everyone. Happy birthday to you.
What is happening? Okay. All right, I'm back. Back to the video. Let's get this one donezo.
He told the union rep, "If I don't get my job back, I'll make Edmond look like Disneyland." McIlvaine's arbitration case for reinstatement remained pending for 13 months. On November 13th, 1991, one day before the shooting, he learned he had officially lost his arbitration.
It means he'll make the previous tragedy look like a joke. Or like a pleasant experience, as opposed to what he will do.
McIlvaine served in the Marines, but his record was marked by repeated insubordination, disciplinary issues, and trouble taking orders. He was demoted multiple times and struggled with authority throughout his enlistment. He was also a professional kickboxer, but his friends and teammates said he would never pick a fight outside the ring. Co-workers were aware that McIlvaine was a ticking time bomb. He had started off as a friendly, easygoing guy, but became increasingly volatile over the years as he was often singled out and harassed by management. After he was fired and started calling the office with threats, some workers said they started planning escape routes in case he ever came back. Prior to the shooting, the Royal Oak Post Office was already being investigated because of an unusually large number of complaints by employees and customers. Workers described it as a hostile, micromanaged environment. They were followed during routes, reprimanded for chatting or taking breaks, forced to do unpaid overtime, and penalized for minor infractions like not wearing a tie. Michigan U.S. Senator Carl Levin said the workplace was, quote, rife with harassment.
Well, that's
Government
insane.
Accountability Office investigation.
How are none of these threats taken seriously? It's hard to say, man. What's unfortunate is the best answer I can give you, and the one that typically happens, is human nature. Nobody wants to think somebody would actually do these sorts of things. It's, yeah, a lot of little reasons is a great way to put it. It's not one thing, it's all of these things. Specifically going postal ends up being, it tends to be an accumulation of problems for these people, like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not one incident that's causing this entire thing. There's an incident that catalyzes what's already thousands of stab wounds in their mind, and finally all of them light up and they just blow up, right? And people don't want to hear this, because unfortunately a lot of life is like this, where the nuances and the problems that we all deal with are so micro and specific that nobody really wants to hear about it, because that requires a lot of thought and complexity. But they just want to hear that, like, they don't want to hear that somebody who is fairly normal decided to shoot and injure / kill 20 people. They want to hear that they were like some messed up dude in the head who was going to do it all along, right? And this is in no way to justify, because once again, a part of criminology is to rationalize the behavior, not because we want to excuse it, but because we want to understand it, right? Because the understanding of criminological behavior allows for a better process in which investigators and anybody else can help prevent or solve crime, right? So the rationalizations of these behaviors are essential for people in criminology, so we can sort of pinpoint these sort of things. We can't understand a person unless we're with them. You know what I mean? You can't see a person from afar, and you certainly can't hear what they have to say if you're not with them, right? So, and as morbid as it is, these behaviors are human. Because unfortunately, enough people are doing these things. This is a human thing that people do. Enough people do this and have done this to where this is an obscure and very small microcosm of human behavior. But it's not just one time. We're literally listening to a video about a bunch of the same type of thing happening in a decade, in a span of 10 years. And now we have them almost every day in some fashion, and it's terrifying. But it's hard to not acknowledge that this is unfortunately an aspect of human nature, and to dehumanize all of these people is a moot point. I think unfortunately the reality is that people do these things and have done these things. Violence is a very relevant thing for people. I mean, how many places, countries, people have just like slaughtered animals or others for practically nothing? I mean, we witnessed one in our current day with what's happening to the Palestinians and many others. Unfortunately, there's too many to even count, because it's not just there. There's many other people being genocided, and it's unfortunately not inherent, but a part of human nature where some people just feel the inclination. But if we don't, in criminology, if you don't try to humanize the criminal, you will have no chance of understanding the behavior, because you will not be able to see how they see it. Therefore, you will not be able to understand it in the same aspect. And being unable to understand the behavior destroys the investigative process. So yeah, you ask yourself, how could somebody do this sort of thing? But unfortunately, it's happened enough times in our time, and even before our time, that it's a human behavior. These things happen and people do these things. And to deny that these people are human at their core but fucked up in their path is ignorant. People don't want to hear it, though. They don't want to hear that a serial killer was a mostly normal person who happened to kill 10 people throughout the span of a couple of years, right? But by all means, a majority of their life was spent being normal, right? Like, that's a hard thing to grasp. That's a very difficult thing to process. How does somebody, for 95% of their time, be the nicest person in the community, but that 5%, they're literally torturing and killing people? It's a terrifying thought, because once again, I mean, we've talked about it before, the social aptitude of especially a serial killer is terrifying. Because they're so good at being appealing for the purpose of what they want deep down. It's a completely different motivation, but at the same time, there's no denying that it's inherently human, because technically they want to be accepted. Now, their reason for being accepted is completely different than most people's reasons for wanting to be accepted, but that need to be accepted is still there. It's a tough question, man, because there's not really a good answer, and the answers that people try to give or try to say is extremely just dangerous language, because dehumanizing people that don't have to but do these things is a great way to just continuously allowing people to do these things. You'll just never understand it. And if you want to put your head in the sand, that is a totally valid thing. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to delve into this sort of stuff. But if the true motivation and interest is to study the behavior and learn and try to help the behavior or prevent the behavior, there needs to be a level of acceptance of humanity within people who do even terrible things like this. Because once again, even motivations, even the things that motivate a serial killer or a spree killer, still boil down inherently to the human motivation and nature. And you have to accept that. You can't dehumanize this sort of person, because you just you break apart the inherent, like, you could do that for anybody in that regard. Because once again, how does a person live 95% of their life doing everything like anybody else would, but 5% they're killing 20 plus people throughout a 10-year, 20-year time span. That's an extremely hard thing to think about. But people want to act like these guys are just out every single night prowling with a knife in a corner in an alley waiting for something to happen. That's not how it works. That's never been how it works for them. And to pretend like that is how it works is fear-mongering and not healthy for you, by the way. Dangerous. It's dangerous to pretend like it's just, I don't know. There's so much to it. I hope that makes some form of sense. It's hard to really tell you what the answer is as to like how could somebody even do this, because you know, this is an inherently, the end result is not a inherently universal experience, but the experience building up to it is universal. Everybody has dealt with one of those days, one of those years, one of those multiple years where just shit continues to push them down, right? And you know, it's where stuff like the word crash out comes from. Like, people only take so much, and unfortunately some people's like level of what they need to do to let out the frustration is way more violent and harmful to everybody else than most. It's hard to grasp, because once again, when you break these behaviors apart, they're inherently human. The majority of this experience is a human thing that we all deal with. The end result is not, obviously. And there's no way justification on my end. There's no way to justify these sorts of moments, right? Like, this is a terrible thing to do to people, right? But you denying that being overworked by your boss, getting denied a promotion, getting denied a transfer, getting harassed at work, getting bullied at work, getting a shit job at work, not being able to get out of that job, getting reprimanded at work for doing nothing really that big of a deal, etc. A lot of these things are extremely universal. And if we don't meet people where
Master's degree student, one of the best things I've learned in my classes is that two contradictory things can be true at the same time. Of course this is human action, but so is kindness and love.
That's
you
nuance.
must accept both.
That is nuance, man. It's tough. It's tough. And this is what people don't want to hear, because a lot of people, majority of the population, just wants the easy answer, which is like, these guys, they're evil. They don't have any thought. They don't have any humanity. And that's just not true. It's just not true, unfortunately. As much as I hate to be the person to break that news, to pretend like most of these people that do these things aren't mostly human is terribly ignorant and dangerous. Because what you do is you get people who are so terrified of nothing, terrified of hypotheticals that don't exist. You get stuff like what happened in Colorado a long time ago, where they were so convinced about super serial killers that they put such restrictive laws on minors who committed murder, that there were kids who committed murder who were in prison for life, no matter what, for a long time. Even though the majority of the idea is to allow these people to be reintroduced at 18 if they do a good job within juvenile hall, right? Obviously, there's whole sorts of complexities to a child murderer, but you get, once again, you get stuff like I just said, where a whole governmental body is convinced that like certain new cultures and video games, etc., are going to create like the super serial killer. So we should make a bunch of laws really punitive in advance for this upcoming thing we have no evidence towards. And then kids who make a terrible choice at an age that they don't even grasp most of reality or life get their fate sealed at 10% of their existence. You know what I mean? Because the nuance is completely overlooked because nobody wants to accept that sometimes people who do evil things can also be inherently a person. And we hate that. We hate that. We hate hearing that. We don't want to hear that. We want evil people to be evil and purely. But there's not a supervillain in reality. There's no Lex Luthor, man. There's no Green Goblin. There aren't people who are just inherently fucked up, and everything they do is fucked up and to fuck over people. You may think that, and you may be told that, and that's an understandable feeling, but at the same time, a majority of the people's lives who do these sorts of things are being a person, and to not accept that is a failure to understand why they would even do these sorts of things. Which is also inherently more terrifying because you're like, this is just a thing anybody could do. Technically speaking, this is just something people are capable of doing. If the switch just flipped and everybody chose such, it's scary. It's a scary reality, but it's the reality we have. And to not at least acknowledge it comes with a really hard inability to grasp the correct knowledge, and it's dehumanizing. Excuse me. All right. My bad. I went on another tangent.
Had already flagged toxic conditions under the postmaster Daniel Priscilla, who had previously been transferred from Indianapolis, where he ran the facility using excessive discipline and racial discrimination. The branch manager Christopher Carlisle, who was killed in the shooting, was also transferred from Indianapolis. The investigation found that Carlisle was widely hated. Employees said that workplace morale plummeted under their leadership. Letter carrier and union rep Charlie Wither said, "I'm sure a lot of people at one time or another fantasized about killing Carlisle. Not anyone in this group, from carriers to clerk, mail handlers to personnel staff, would shed a tear for that monster."
Let me ask you something. What do you do for a living?
There it is.
I'm a United States postal worker. Aren't those the guys that always go crazy and come back with a gun and shoot everybody? Sometimes.
Postal vehicle maintenance worker Lawrence Jason shot and killed another mechanic, wounded 2 more co-workers, then killed himself. He worked on and off for the Postal Service for 27 years and had a history of warnings, suspensions, and threats dating back to 1986. Jason served in the Army from 1967 to 1969.
Yeah, great example. The Unabomber. In the Unabomber's writing, he was basically like, I'm literally not fucking crazy. I'm just pissed. And I need people to notice. It's interesting. It's interesting because you once again you see that glimpse of humanity within that writing where he wants people to understand him and he wants to be accepted for his thoughts. It's interesting, man. It's wild. That's a great example. Thanks for bringing that up.
Was demoted twice for disobeying orders and was barred from reenlistment. He had no criminal record. On the same day in California, Mark Richard Hilbun, a fired postal worker, killed his mother and her dog in her home, then went to his former workplace and shot 2 employees, killing 1. He intended to kidnap a female employee he had been stalking, but she was unharmed in the shooting. He then began a 2-day violent rampage, robbing people at ATMs and injuring several other members of the public. Hilburn had a long history of alcohol and drug abuse.
That's a long one.
And was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder with depressive features. He served in the Air Force from 1976 to 1982. Former letter carrier Ronald Wendell Downs Sr. ambushed and shot his ex-girlfriend, who was also a letter carrier, while she was delivering on her route. He had been fired from the Postal Service for repeatedly threatening to kill her, and had a past arrest for threatening her with a gun. Downs had served in the Navy. Postal worker Bruce Clark shot and killed his supervisor after an argument. Clark had worked at the mail processing center for 25 years, was quiet, had no disciplinary problems, no history of conflict with other employees, and was known for caring for stray cats. He served in the Marines from 1966 to 1970 and had no history of substance abuse, mental health problems, or violence. Fired mail handler Charles Edward Jennings shot and killed labor relations specialist James Brown in the parking lot of his former workplace. Jennings' track record at USPS was conflicting. He had been recognized several times for excellent performance, yet had multiple suspensions and letters of warning, and was ultimately fired for falsifying records and fraud. Before the shooting, Jennings explicitly
Military service seems to pop up a lot. Can't imagine why.
threatened to kill several supervisors if he was
Aren't
terminated.
all these only men?
But
No,
those
there's a woman
warnings were never
example
passed
there.
on to authorities. After the firing, he spiraled into heavy drug use, spending several days in a motel smoking crack, where he reportedly told a woman he planned to kill his former bosses. Jesus Antonio Tamayo.
Okay, so the actual reason that the military gets brought up a lot is because the military actually preys on vulnerable, mentally ill, or desperate men who need belonging, funding, acceptance, or validation. So a lot of these men who have a lot of things going on in their head and don't have a good place to actually go and digest that information get put into a toxic situation where they're basically validated for being like really upset and wanting to take it out on something. So then they're told that they can go and like shoot at people and actually take it out on something. But then when they're done going and doing that thing, they come back here where they don't get to do that. And then they're upset because they don't get to do that because their usual solution has been validated for like a ton of time in their very important developmental years mentally in their 18 to 20s. And then they basically can't handle normal societal structure because for like 4 years, whatever, they were basically told that all of their problems are basically valid and they can solve it by just being violent.
Was working the service window at the post office when he spotted his ex-wife and her friend standing in line. Without a word, he reached into his drawer, grabbed a fanny pack, and calmly walked out the employee exit. Moments later, he returned through the public lobby, pulled a gun from his pack, and shot both women, wounding his ex-wife and killing her friend. Tamayo then stepped outside and shot himself dead. He and his ex-wife had been divorced for 4 years before the shooting. Anthony James DeCulett shot and killed a fellow postal clerk, wounded 2 more, then killed himself. 16 months earlier, DeCulett had told his therapist that he was under a lot of stress and wanted to kill his boss, while co-workers believed the shooting was a result of frustration over unrequited love he had for a co-worker. He had been evaluated by the USPS but was deemed fit for duty and did not pose an acute danger. He served in the Marines for 5 years and received a Good Conduct Medal. Letter carrier Maceo Yarbao returned from his route, entered the lunchroom of North Haven Station, and shot postal clerk Lavinia Shaw, believing that she had directed her boyfriend and postal inspectors to follow him. Yarbao suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He was found mentally unfit to stand trial and was committed to the maximum security unit at a state mental hospital.
Even though I apologized to Lucy, something was still plaguing me. Like Josh thinking I was mean was making me postal.
Move into the right lane?
January 2006's infamous Goleta shooting is considered to be the final chapter in the deadly era of going postal killings. although there have been a few more post office workplace shootings since then that barely made headlines due to the fact that the public had become desensitized to incidents where only 1 or 2 people were killed. 44-year-old Jennifer San Marco started her day at the Santa Barbara condo complex where she lived 3 years earlier and shot her former neighbor, Beverly Graham, in the head, someone she used to argue with constantly. Less than an hour later, San Marco arrived at the Goleta mail processing plant, where she had previously worked for 6 years. She tailgated another car through the security gate, stole an employee's ID badge to enter the building, pulled out a handgun, then methodically shot 6 employees dead. Her last victim was listening to music with headphones and never heard the gunshots. San Marco then shot herself in the head. To this day, it remains the deadliest mass shooting ever committed by a woman in US history. San Marco had a documented history of severe mental illness. In 2003, the USPS had forced her into psychiatric retirement and she had to be wheeled out of the mail processing plant in handcuffs. She had a long-standing feud with her neighbor Beverly, and other neighbors described her as unstable as she could often be seen arguing with herself, kneeling and praying in the street, singing at the top of her lungs, and stripping naked in public. She later moved to a home in the New Mexico desert. She attempted to distribute her homemade newsletter called The Racist Press, which was filled with errors and bizarre explanations about serial killer David Berkowitz, who was working as a letter sorter for the USPS at the time of his arrest, the KKK, and other racist murders. Co-workers said her behavior grew more bizarre over the years. She'd talk or argue with herself and sometimes made racist comments, though she never actually threatened anyone. 6 of her 8 victims were minorities, so racial discrimination was not ruled out as a motive. Police later found incoherent writings in her home alluding to a conspiracy against her, orchestrated by her former workplace and a local medical facility where she was once held. Despite all this, San Marco was able to legally purchase her gun and ammo used in the shooting from a local pawn shop. So what exactly was going on at the USPS that led to over 20 mass shootings perpetrated by employees in just 2 decades? Let's rewind a bit first. The US Postal Service didn't always operate like a business. It was an official department of the federal government until 1971, when it was restructured into a semi-independent agency meant to run like a business but still serve the public. The plan was for it to eventually fund itself, but it didn't really work out that way. By the mid-1970s, the USPS was hemorrhaging money. Stamps doubled in price, while the post offices were barred from expanding into non-mail services to bring in extra revenue. Tens of thousands of workers were cut, and Congress had to bail it out with $1 billion lifeline. Meanwhile, competition from UPS and other private carriers was also eating into the business. As budgets tightened, management put more and more pressure on postal workers on the ground to work harder and faster, increase surveillance, and enforce stricter discipline. Employee complaints and stress levels skyrocketed. Then in the 1980s, a wave of workplace violence in post offices erupted. The worst of them, the 1986 Edmond shooting, was so shocking that it cemented postal killings as a pattern, sparked the expression going postal, and postal workers were stereotyped as being more likely to be violent and mentally unstable. As more deadly incidents broke out in post offices around the country, the stories in the media began to sound similar. Disgruntled postal worker snaps because they were recently disciplined or fired and angry at management. And many of them seemed to have existing mental health issues or were veterans with a short fuse. But as almost always the case, news headlines never tell the whole story. In 2000, the 249-page USPS Commission on a Safe and Secure Workplace report was published. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University surveyed and interviewed thousands of postal workers as well as employees from other industries, going case by case, broke down the data, and uncovered that going postal was a myth. First thing to know is that the US Postal Service is massive. It's the second largest civilian employer in America after Walmart, and in 1999, it had over 900,000 employees. It's also an unusually stable workforce. Postal employees are twice as likely as the average US worker to have stayed in their job for over a decade. The report found that postal workers were no more likely to physically assault, sexually harass, or verbally abuse their co-workers than workers in any other sector.
So it's
what the data actually showed was that workplace violence in general was far too common across America, not uniquely at the USPS. In fact, postal workers were much less likely to be victims of homicide on the job. Between 1992 and 1998, the rate of workplace homicide among USPS employees was 0.26 per 100,000, about 1/3 of the national average of 0.77.
Wow.
For perspective, retail workers were 8 times more likely to be killed at work, and taxi drivers were 150 times more likely. As for whether postal workers were more likely to be killed by co-workers, the numbers were impossible to pin down because nearly half of all workplace homicides in the US couldn't be traced to a known perpetrator type. Therefore, there was no solid basis for comparing USPS to the rest of the workforce on that point. The report did reveal some serious structural problems at the Postal Service and a lot of unhappy employees. Even though postal workers were actually found to be less angry, aggressive, and stressed than average, they still tended to have more negative attitudes about their jobs, their co-workers, and their managers. 31% of postal
Do you remember all that stuff earlier? I was talking about sensationalizations within American media and people in general, and how a lot of us just want to hear some crazy shit. Here we go. Exactly it. The media sees a story that people are latched to, and they blow it up. And they, you know, they really go after it. I mean, not a similar example, but an example is when all this stuff a couple of days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, months ago even, were happening with the planes. A bunch of planes were malfunctioning, etc. That happens all the time. It happens all the time. But because people were so attached to the story and interested in the story, media publishing companies, etc., were like, oh, let's talk about these. So even the littlest of them, people would write and report and latch onto. So I think that's part of where he's going here, where it was like, this is more uncommon than everything else statistically, but because it was such a sensationalized thing that when it happened, it got blown up into proportion. Goes back into all what I was saying about sensationalization earlier. Goes into stuff like, you know, when I was in St. Louis, and Mike Brown got killed, I lived in a town near Ferguson and had a friend in Ferguson, had people, I would drive through Ferguson, I had people in Ferguson, I would frequently go through the area, even during that time, and there was always like, during that time, the national media really like set it up where like they thought, they reported that like basically the entirety of that city was just like erupted and on fire and a mess and a battleground. And it was like, technically there was only damage done to a very small portion of the downtown of that area. But because people were so interested and so attached to these stories, sensationalization comes out. Fear-mongering occurs because that gets people riled up and reading and watching and scared and attached and attentive.
The workers had negative opinions of their co-workers versus 14% nationally, and only 58% felt positively about their managers versus 79%. The USPS also had a massive 126,000 active grievances, with 6,300 of those ending up in arbitration in 1999. For comparison, the entire US auto industry of over 400,000 unionized workers saw just 11 arbitrations in 1 year. Postal workers consistently rated their managers more negatively than the average American worker. They were less likely to trust leadership to be fair or honest, less likely to feel recognized for good work, and less confident that management was making the workplace safe. In fact, 27% said managers would, quote, try to provoke employees to violence, compared to just 6% of the national workforce. 8% agreed that threats or violence were effective ways to get things done at work, which was 4 times higher than the national rate. Postal workers reported having little freedom in their day-to-day work and scored significantly lower on autonomy measures than workers in other industries. Postal workers were also more than twice as likely as the wider workforce to fear their supervisors. The stats from the report painted a clear picture of a highly toxic workplace culture.
This
Add
is
to
fascinating.
That, underfunding, strict management,
It's like
and
both.
unreasonable
It's actually
productivity
like both
demands.
answers.
You'll get a workplace where people are deeply unhappy. I'm not trying to victimize the killers, but it turns out when you strip workers of their autonomy and ignore their grievances, some of them might snap. The next part of the going postal narrative.
1,000 cuts. Like I said previous. It isn't. And this happens for a lot of people. Somebody being extremely upset isn't that one day. It's all of those days where something like that happened, all adding up and it just exploding.
Was that the USPS failed to properly screen its hires and that military veterans were behind a disproportionate number of postal killings. Because the USPS was technically a government agency, it had a mission to hire people who might struggle to find work elsewhere, including those with incomplete employment histories or even mental health concerns. It also had a veterans preference policy where former service members, especially those who served in combat, got a boost in the hiring process.
What does that sound like?
That's why postal workers were more than twice as likely to be veterans compared to the general workforce. That being said, the report proved that veterans weren't any more likely to become violent. About 71% of the known perpetrators were veterans, but that's roughly in line with the number of male postal workers who were veterans too. Statistically, the difference wasn't significant. The real issue was in how hiring and red flags were handled. In several cases, people who went on to commit violence had serious warning signs in their background, like substance abuse issues, undisclosed criminal records, or disciplinary problems in the military. Sometimes, managers let those things slide because they thought they had to hire veterans, even when there were good reasons not to. When warning signs popped up on the job, like threats, erratic behavior, concerning statements, responses were all over the place. In some cases, action was taken, but in too many others, the red flags were ignored, misjudged, or not reported at all. One employee even warned their manager that a coworker was, quote, a time bomb waiting to go off, but nothing was done. So once again, it came down to structural problems, inadequate background checks, misunderstanding of hiring policies, and a lot of missed opportunities to act. The Goleta shooting happened 6 years after this report was published and recommendations were handed down to the USPS. And there have been more postal killings since in recent years, but that feels less like a postal problem and more relevant to America's mass shootings problem, which is a whole other story. I don't live in the US and can't speak to how postal workers are perceived over there nowadays. So please share in the comments, is going postal still a thing? What do people think of the USPS in general? As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.
Great video.